So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today to hear from Nicole Hayes, the curator of The Material, The Thing, which is our 15th annual Hudson Valley Artist exhibition here at the Dorsky Museum. This is one of my favorite series that we do here at the Dorsky. It's an opportunity for us to not only sort of keep up with what's being made today in the Hudson Valley by our incredible artists. But it's also an opportunity for me as the manager of education and visitor experience here at the Dorsky to share that with SUNY New Paltz students and other young people who visit the museum. I don't want to talk too much because you're not here to see me. We're here to see and hear from Nicole. So it's my pleasure to introduce Nicole Hayes, who's a curator who utilizes art to deepen human connection by amplifying diverse voices and augmenting visitor engagement. Nicole joined Art Oh My as curator in 2014 and has curated exhibitions and events with Alison Saar, Iranto Espirito Santo, Nicole Cherubini, Liliana Porter, and David Shrigley, among others. Pardon me. Before moving upstate, Nicole lived in New York City and managed the studio of internationally acclaimed abstract painter Sean Scully. Nicole began her career at the groundbreaking not-for-profit Exit Art. Excuse me. She currently lives in the tiny hamlet of Oh My, New York, with her children and dog, and enjoys watching the seasons change on her daily walks at Art Oh My. Nicole's a BFA in ceramics from Rhode Island School of Design and maintains an active studio pottery practice and has curated just an incredible exhibition. I'm so excited for her to share it with you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. And thank you to everybody who could, be here on a Friday and who's still, in the Zoom world. I'm so glad you're all here. And, thank you to everybody at the Dorsky. I have loved this annual exhibition and I make a pilgrimage down there to see the Hudson Valley Annual every year. So I was really delighted to get the call and be asked. And similarly, like it served me as like a way to really start to see what was happening in the Hudson Valley. When I first started going, it was probably in like 2014. It was when Corinna up at UAlbany had curated the show. So it was just really wonderful to be invited. And so I wanted to start with a little bit about what my inspiration was behind the show. And I'm just going to put up a image because we're okay. We did it. Okay. Great. So immediately when asked, being somebody with a background in ceramics, and I kind of thought about craft just because that is like something that is part of this community. And as some of you might know, Anna curated a beautiful iteration, Anna Conlin, director at the Dorsky, called New Folk a couple of years ago that really focused on folk and craft traditions. And so it was kind of thinking of like, okay, how do we engage with that, but in a somewhat different way? And thinking of the functional pottery backgrounds, like I just identify people with artists who like make objects and who enjoy engaging with material pursuits within objects. And when I, look at my own curatorial work, I see that thread through it, that I rarely choose very conceptual work. It usually has something to do with somebody who's engaging deeply with a kind of material practice in a way. So with all these thoughts kind of buzzing around and needing to think of a title and all this, I had this moment at work where Jordan Rosenau, who is in the show and who happens to work with me at Art Oh My, I just recently met Jordan shortly before this, and we were having this staff just kind of pin up in the gallery. And Jordan came in and had these materials with her. And it was just like a pile of cinder blocks and a pile of plywood and a pile of some pressure treated wood. And I was just kind of had this moment where I'm like, what are they doing? Like, what is this going to turn into? And I was like, all right. And I just kind of went back in my office and was just kind of waiting to see what would transpire. And when I came out, 40 minutes later or whatever, this is what was standing in the gallery. And in that winter landscape with the beautiful light that comes through in that gallery, these materials became completely transformed. And at the same time, they were still entirely what they were. Like, they weren't like pretending not to be a cinder block or pretending not to be a 2x4, like they're 4x4, like they were that. And I was kind of struck by this like moment of like how artists can change things, transform them as sort of alchemists from what they are into something else without ever losing the sense of those materials, like that it could be that simple. And I sort of was like, oh, it's like the materials are also the thing, was sort of this moment that I had with her. And then on top of that object, which, glass, of course, says this like, does beautiful things. So on its own. So on top of this kind of stack that of wood and concrete that resembles like the foundation of a building, right? So we've like the concrete foundation and then the pressure treated on and up. And then on the top, we have these like beautiful tanks. And one is filled with Windex, which is like, not exactly a high material in anybody's count. And then the other is filled with water with beets in them right there. And so right there in the gallery, there's this like alchemy moment happening of beets staining the water. And I just love just how straightforward and transformational this was. So this is the piece when the beets are all filled out and everything. So that's really where the title came from, and this kind of inspirational moment. And at the same time, I was also reading Glenn Adamson's book, Fewer Better Things. And being a person in contemporary times, I spend a lot of time thinking about like overconsumption. And it's just something that just kind of drags on me in my daily life as I imagine other people. And I was just kind of thinking how to bring some of those ideas into the show. And also just this idea that we've lost, that Glenn talks about a lot, that we've lost touch with like the beauty of objects and the quality of well-made, well-crafted objects. And instead we're just being like force-fed tons of junk and tons of mass-produced objects. And again, thinking of this alchemy of artists, that like artists could take that junk, which is kind of like the material of our time, it's what we're going to be like left with, and the for certain future, and change that into something magical. And so I kind of wanted to bring that element into it. And I also kind of was thinking that while at this moment where like most people don't even know the difference in quality between like the thing that they're buying at the big box store, between like what like should actually be inside a piece of furniture to make it last like the same way your grandparents did, like, but artists do. Like artists are kind of that conduit to like understanding the materials of our culture, in that they're also going that extra step of understanding the trash of our culture. And just as another consideration, so it's like, I'm trying just to layer all these things. I'm also thinking about place, and I'm thinking about the Hudson Valley. And I want to think about what is unique to being an artist in the Hudson Valley, and what is unique to materials of artists in the Hudson Valley. And this is a work that is not in the exhibition. It's also something we showed at Art My by an artist, Keandra Strobert. So it was really easy to start thinking about the Hudson Valley and think about, artists like living in these like cute little studios with like cute barns and stuff like that. And like, but then I was just like, wait a minute, that's not the demographic reality of this place, right? This is an urban place. When you look at your congressional districts and what else, you see that there's a lot of different kind of people. And I was really interested in making sure the show could cross as many borders as possible and not be in any way centered on people living on like cute dirt roads, making stuff out of like chosen materials. And so partially inviting in like the detritus of trash is one way of doing that. But also just thinking about like readily available materials, like same as the things from Lowe's. But Kiandra, this was a show that she did at Art Oh My in March 2021. It opened. And she is an artist who lives in Hudson, New York, is from Brooklyn originally, and really is a painter. And this is this kind of assemblaged painting. But so she's living in downtown Hudson, which is this kind of, Tony area. And when you live there, all of your real shopping, if you're not buying like a latte or an antique chair, all of your real shopping happens out on the strip mall with all the big box stores. And everything in this work by Kianja is coming from those stores. Like she's not ordering stuff from fancy art supply places. It's like if she can't get it at Lowe's or Joann's or quite often the dollar store, it's not part of her work. And I just also loved that, sort of egalitarian like approach that includes everyone. So that's a little bit of the background of how we got to the show. And then, I just thought I would talk about, kind of do a little virtual tour of what we have. Actually, I want to talk about a couple before we get there. So this is another little piece of Kianja's, and all of these things are made out of like plaster and plaster lathe, and it's just really simple materials. And she though we had an art handler for her, she's just carrying everything over in her car, because that's kind of how she is. So then kind of thinking beyond that theme of these materials and of artists that I knew of in the Hudson Valley that were these kinds of alchemists who were taking things around them and transforming them in magical ways. And Dan Devine, whose work is pictured in the front here. In the back, we're seeing two pieces by Catherine Umstead, one that's made out of saran wrap and one that's made out of tinfoil. But Dan Devine is an artist who's lived in the Hudson Valley for over 20 years. He happens to be my neighbor. And I was first introduced to his work because he used to have a sheep farm as a work of art. And I would walk there with my kids and we would go see Dan's sheep. And there was a little sign on the fence that said, "This is a work of art," and sort of explained it. And that was always fun. And then one day I was walking in the sheep farm with Dan, and there was this kind of ball of fencing that was all like wound up and cylindrical, and there were all these weeds growing out of it. And I sort of thought it was like some kind of piece of farm equipment or something. And I asked Dan, I was like, "What is that? Like, what does that thing do for the sheep?" And he turned to me and he was like, "Nicole, that's art." And I just thought that was so funny that that he could just make this artwork that would, even catch me off guard as actually being art, that he had to tell me that's what it was. But I love this idea of things being transformative in that way, that even the sort of seasoned art looker would not quite know what they are. I found that really charming. And in Dan's recent work, he is a motorcycle. When he was a young person, he was paid to ride motorcycles around Europe, and he was like the equivalent of a motorcycle NASCAR guy. And now he's taking these parts of his motorcycles and sort of embalming them with this leather material. And it's again this very simple gesture that transforms this kind of hunk of thing that was just in his garage into this transformational art object. And here it is from behind. And I just love like this sense of the sort of brushstroke in this piece and the directness of it. And that something could be that direct and then be transformational at the same time. And also then, just kind of, I'm trying to like, when coming up with this theme and just thinking of, what I know might be out there. I thought about Joel Olzak a bit, who had been a student at SUNY New Paltz. And I knew that Joel was making these pieces that were really like about making, right? They're like, here he's got this kind of toolkit of how to make shingles. And he's showing that as an artwork. And he's done other pieces where he really directly kind of forages a tree from somewhere and then transforms that into artwork. So it's also just, people who layer in that sense of making in their work was also something that had an appeal to me. And we're also looking at just Meg Hitchcock, who's on the left, who does these beautiful drawings with excerpts from the Quran and other religious texts in them. And Nikki Lederer, who is really taking a piece of turning the detritus of society into beautiful works of art. And this is a flag that is made out of used umbrellas that she finds along the way. So this is sort of the opening moment to the show, and Courtney and Melissa, who are here, Courtney Fouquet and Melissa Dodorian, are featured in this photo. Melissa's work are the two textile pieces on the back, and Courtney's pieces are up front. And I like, this was sort of the part that I kind of most envisioned. It's an interesting space, the Dworsky, because there's a lot of different ceiling heights, but this was sort of how I imagined people walking in. And Courtney, it's funny to speak about your work while you're here, but I'm sure you could do a better job than I, but Courtney and I had a great conversation prior to the show when selecting the work. And one thing that really excited me was that, she's this perfect example of somebody who's just transforming, is that she takes these found objects and they become something completely different through this like methodical wrapping process. And at the end of that, it's like, I so desperately want to be like, well, what is it? Like, what is contained within that? And she was like, oh, I don't even really remember anymore what the thing was. And I love that idea that like, at the end of the process, it just became the sculpture to her. And maybe like all of those little components of stuff that she found just sort of faded away, and that it wasn't about like kind of making this list of what all of those things were. Oh, and here's a sort of detail of it. You can see it in relationship to Jordan Rosenau's piece, which is on the other side there. Here we have Melissa again, who's using a lot of found textile materials and layering in different kinds of transparent materials in there as well. Julie Torres, who has a little piece on the kind of floor on the back left. And then kind of in the front right here is a piece by Leticia Hussein. And Leticia, when I talked to her about the show, had applied with some really simple, smaller pieces that she had made out of these kind of found pieces of metal. And I knew that she also did larger installation work. So we had a conversation about maybe doing a bigger piece for this show. She's always had just this fantastic material sense, again, often using rope and wood, and her works have this sort of sense of story and history to them. And she devised this idea of making this kind of boat seed pod type of shape. And as like an attention to material, the boat shape is made out of a single piece of plywood that she's cut and then sort of spreads out like an accordion that once it goes together, or once it expands, and then becomes this sort of floating boat form. And the name of this work is Dream Boat. Um, and there was just this kind of moment, right? As she's taking that material idea again and just making it so clear and has this total elegance to it of just stretching that open, hanging it from the rafters. And it sort of has this heft to it and also this lightness at the same time. And I love this piece as being something that you kind of first see as you're coming into the gallery, in that it kind of discusses a journey. I've also kind of had this feeling like, oh, if you're going to have a Hudson Valley show, maybe you need to have one piece that is a boat in some small way, thinking of the history of place, that we are in some ways always going to be somewhat a maritime kind of place, but also that this ship had sort of a ghostly feeling to it as well. It's obviously not a boat you're going to get into and ride away from. And it felt for me like this nod to the Hudson Valley history, and all of the baggage that comes with it being a maritime culture. This to me looks like sort of more like a Western kind of boat. And I liked that idea that it created this sense of journey within the exhibition, and also talked about, that history. And now if we look to the right, when we're in the show, we're looking at some pieces by Ashley Lyon, which are the ceramic pieces on the left and right in the foreground. Ashley, I met really recently and was really blown away. Obviously, my back again, ceramics, but her sense of being able to take that material and make it seem like another material is just so exciting, right? It's like this kind of Robert Gober kind of like inflated chunky thing on the left here, and then this beautiful rope coil on the right. She does things that are just impossible to imagine, with the ceramic material, where it suspends disbelief. And I think that also idea of artists that were really almost working in a trompe l'oeil way was also attractive to me, like within this show, of people that took one thing and entirely made it look like something else entirely. It's like, here we have ceramic looking like rope and rubber, in a time when if she just wanted to put a piece of rope on a pedestal, she could be completely free to do that as an artist, but that she chooses to kind of go through this impossible process and take the thing that has the least rope-like qualities of almost any art material and turn it into a rope. It's just like completely absurd and brilliant and just intense at the same time. And for certain, like one of the amazing things about curating the show is getting to throw, as like a curator, is getting to throw your idea out there of the things that you most love and the kind of work that you're most interested in seeing, and then getting like over 300 artists in your region to respond to that call. And that's what I was so excited about, of just like, who's out there who's doing this, and like, why don't I know them, and maybe I'll find them. And I mean, definitely worth saying, like, there could have been 2 or 3 versions of this show out of that call. And actually kind of nod to Brees. Brees really kind of urged me, Brees Honeycutt, who's an artist who's here, she's not on the show, she lives in Massachusetts, but who kind of urged me to just be as democratic as possible and to include as many voices as possible. And I really thought about that a lot, like that I wanted to just, there was such a just wealth of material to choose from. And it was like incredibly difficult decisions, even to get down to 27 artists. And like I said, I'm still kind of thinking of other future shows that could come out of that same group of people. And, there were times when I could have like flipped the whole thing. So anyhow, looking back here at this piece, which is glass and copper and sulfur by Romina Gonzalez, who had just had a show in Newburgh that was happening right around the same time. And this was definitely one of those submissions. This is Ashley Lyon in detail here of the rope piece. And this is Romina's pulled glass piece. And I didn't know her work at all. And it was just like, when I saw this, I was just like, yeah, like that's exactly what I'm thinking about. You know, she engages so directly with glass. She's not hiding this copper tubing at all. It's there. It is what it is. And again, it's transformational. So this work also has an interactive element, in the fact that we've got this piece of beautiful glass that's hanging there. You can walk around it, you can look through it. These two little kind of mounds on the floor are these like meditative sitting stones, and there's directions within the gallery so that you can stand on them, sit on the other, and then you can walk through this archway. So this was a challenge to kind of create an intimate installation within this large room. And I think it was pretty successful. Given the parameters, but I love this glass pull and how it becomes a window for the experience. Another artist I had somehow missed in my time in the art world and in the Hudson Valley was the amazing Sydney Cash, who was in the collection of the Dorsky, but I hadn't been exposed to Sydney's work. And I saw these pieces, you know, in the slide, and I was just like, oh yeah, what are those? So clearly there's some kind of like, they sang hardware store to me, which I love. And as I got to know Sydney a lot, like just the layers that built up, learning about his practice and his endless exploration. Sydney's now in his 80s, and he is constantly pushing himself, which is something that just excites me so much, that somebody who can experiment continuously for that amount of time in their life and like never exhaust all of the options. And so what he's doing is he's making these structures out of metal wiring. He has a background in glass and in some jewelry making, kind of using those tools. And then one thing that really, I didn't know this until after the show, is that I was really excited. I was like, what is this weird pink color? That's like so cool that he's just like going for it with the pink. And I later came to find out that Sydney puts up a little post-it in the hardware store. He lives in Marlboro, New York, saying, artist looking for used paint. And all of his paint is sourced from people giving him like their half buckets of leftover paint. And then he takes those unused paint that was going to go into the landfill, and he makes these little dip tanks out of them. And all of these things are actually just dipped. He's like really taking old like fish tanks and stuff like you see in Jordan's piece, in dipping the work right in that. And so the pink color is also constantly changing as he has to sort of freshen up the vat a little bit. And the same with the minty green and the gray. All of those are just disposed paint from his hardware store. And I also just think it just speaks so much of innovation, right? And of community, like that this is how he's sourcing these materials. And I thought that was a really exciting thing. And it's been great to get to know him. And here's some other details. And also these pieces, while again, these low materials are like so precious when installed in the gallery space. And, we talked a lot about how they have this beautiful shadow play and really emphasizing that. It's one thing, the lighting and the gallery is really beautiful. And Bob Wagner did a great job installing these and hanging them on the wall. And they become expansive, where it's not just the piece, but it's the shadow play as well. And this is the work of Adam Chow, who was an artist whose work I had followed out of my interest in ceramics. And I was just like so delighted to see that he had applied to be in the show. Um, Adam makes these pieces that are the size and shape of a cell phone, because like, let's face it, that's like the shape that we all like seem to know and love the best. And then in one series, he sort of takes like Google searches. There's a piece of those also in the show, and explores that theme and makes these beautiful blue and white decorated phones with these sort of different Google search terms. So taking like the term dragon, which is the one in this show. And then with these pieces, these butterfly tiles, well, phone tiles, it just like it blew my mind what he's doing. So the blue of these butterflies painted on here is actually uh, cobalt that he extracts from the old batteries of phones. So he's actually doing that work of like going in, smashing out the raw material, like cobalt on porcelain, like you couldn't get any more ancient than that, you know, and beautiful and like cultural. And then, but doing that in this way where he's actually reusing a material, transforming something that we're all holding in our hand every day into this magical expression. So I thought that was really special. How are we on time, Zach? Good. Okay. And also, so, you know, this show, I really wanted to make it clear that this wasn't like just about people who were using recycled materials, or just about for sculptors. And, you know, it was really important to me in putting out the call that any artist might feel like they had maybe something to do with that in their work, just to kind of give space, right? And this is the work of Julie Torres, who many of you might know runs Lab Space Gallery in Hillsdale. And Julie makes these really direct paintings. And I kind of first got to know Julie's paintings. She was just sort of had like a bunch in a cigar box one day, and like gave one to my son, and it was really sweet. So and she just uses paint in this really direct way. There's no like kind of fiddling around with it. And I particularly love, I think I have a detail of it next, yeah, this spoogey green one where it's just like so clear, it's just this gesture of the paint blob, but that Julie also does not sort of hold to like the hierarchies of painting, and that like all the paintings must be hung at 60 on the wall and they're all together, and that she can take these little objects, transform them into this like little mini installation, again by just taking the paintings off the wall. Also within all of these, many of these objects anyhow, are like little pieces of thrown away plastic, or that she just kind of will take back into the studio and just start pouring onto it. So I just love that sense of the directness of working with paint, that is not like what you think of as traditional painting. And an artist, Daniel Giordano, who is actually sited across from Sydney Cash. And I felt like there was sort of a story there between the two of them, living and working in Newburgh. I sort of think after my conversation with Courtney months ago, of how Courtney was saying how she kind of forgets what's inside of these materials, inside of the finished work, and how Daniel does this exact opposite. His material lists are huge and long, kind of going through every speck of everything that's in there. You know, it's like you almost feel like the material list is going to be like, you know, floor fluff and you know, there's like a piece of orange in this one and all kinds of wires. And you know, I think also like emblematic of like, here's an artist working in the Hudson Valley, working in a factory in Newburgh, New York, and really just taking on all of that stuff that is all around the factory, piled on the floor, gluing it together, and just being so direct with this sort of time of detritus that we find ourselves in. And I think there's just a couple more. Shoshana Dents, who is again a painter. But what I love about Shoshana's paintings is, while this, you know, seems to be like a beautiful painting of maybe something abstract, and there's all these reflected layers, but that this is the object. But what Shoshana also makes in order to make these paintings are these very detailed still lives, these little kind of boxes that almost seem like a little dream box full of reflective colored material that's taped together. And then these paintings are actually of those, almost, they really could be considered sculptures onto themselves. And that her time is really this, if her working is this like deeply meditative process of just staring at this tiny still life and very painstakingly looking at detailed times of day, transforming it into this painted work of art. And there's so much about color, time, and space and the light when she's making them. And so for me, it's like this piece becomes, it's like about tape and mirrors, and a sense those are the materials, but then the actual thing again is this little painting. It's really sweet. So actually that's where I wrapped it up. So and I'm sorry, like, if I didn't go to, there's so many great works in the show. So this is just a tiny detail of what's in there. And there's another great event happening. So there's an artist talk on the 22nd. So people can learn more then. Any questions?
So you should be able to unmute yourself if you have a question. I think I've allowed it. I have. Can also put it in the chat and I'll read it if you'd like.
Thanks for mentioning that Tang drink powder.
Yeah.
Forgotten that.
I wanted to say on the in terms of the events, there's this talk on the 22nd. It's a Saturday at 2 p.m. October 22nd. The artists will be Sydney Cash, Courtney. Is it Puckett? Am I saying it wrong?
Puckett.
Puckett. Sorry, Courtney.
It's okay.
Puckett.
Not as fancy as you'll have it be, Nicole.
Nikki Lederer, Joel Olzak, Elise Lendvay, and Romina Gonzalez will all be participating. And then also the next week on Sunday at 2 p.m., Daniel Giordano will lead another marzipan dyeing and sculpting workshop. It'll be spooky season, so we'll be making edible evil creatures so we can make our fears into a sculptural form and then eat them.
I have two things. Hi, it's Courtney Puckett. I have two things. They're not so much questions, but just reflections of the show. One of them is, or perhaps gratitude for Nicole making space for artists that are concerned with environmental issues. Like, while I don't necessarily name what I use, it is important to me that it's all stuff that has been used. Like, I really try not to consume too much for my work. There's already so much out there. So I just appreciate that was such a strong idea in the show among other ideas. And the other thing I think, and this might be a testament to the the history of this regional, sort of gathering of artists in the region is just the kind of the caliber of artists that apply to it. I think probably usually regional open call shows are maybe for artists that don't have a lot of exposure. And in this, I think it's really, again, both a testament to the quality of the past shows and curation, but also your theme, Nicole, and just the strength of the community here and wanting to be a part of it, even if you're an artist who maybe, not to say any artist doesn't need a show, but like it's I think that's of note with this show.
Yeah, I just have to say, like, yeah, like, dang, that is true, like, times 10,000. It was just like, it was really humbling because I also know that, putting these like submissions together does not like is not nothing. Like, it takes a lot of effort and time. And also just this like tenacity of artists to like just keep doing it and keep going forward is it's just humbling because it's in that there's 300 some odd of them that just wanted to try to do this show. And like a friend of mine was like, yeah, like just people were doing the math for me, like, oh yeah, if you spent like 10 minutes with you, I was like, oh right. And that was the thing. It was even just really wanting to do that, like just honoring that space of like, you gave this much effort and I need to return that, at least in some small part. Yeah, I think that is just huge. And also even thinking of like what it came up a little bit because the show does say that it's for like emerging artists. And what does that mean to be an emerging artist, and like, how long can we emerge for? It's seemingly quite a long time, as it really turns out. But yeah, just how many people are working at it and just how real the grind is. So thank you, Hudson Valley Artists and everyone.
I just wanted to thank you too, Nicole. It's Carlin Benson,
Thank you.
interim curator at Dodorsky, and it was a pleasure to work with you. And I just love, what you did with the exhibition and the connections that you made between the different artists and the materials. I think it's, it's just really great. I just love seeing it over and over again. So thank you.
Thank you. Me too. I can't wait to go back. It's always so nice to be in the room. And, like kind of seeing that, like just to kind of go back to Courtney's thought about that for a minute and, being just kind of overwhelmed by this embarrassment of riches, which is the Hudson Valley Artists, that and not everybody could be in the show, right? Like even with trying to cram as much in as possible, still choices had to be made. But I also just valued so much like the getting to learn about so many different people. And I've also just tried to, I was just talking to somebody about this, like, there's always this like moment when you're curating something where it's like clearly everybody's applying because they want to be in the show, right? And I also want everybody to be happy and successful, but that these things are also just about building, like kind of going to what Carolyn was saying, that these things are also about building connection, and that we also just are trying to build, like, I feel like one of the ways out of our predicament as the human race is just like building connection between all of us. And so maybe if you're not in the show, I know of your work. It's like when people kind of reach out or I see somebody in an event, I'm always really wanting to be like, I saw your submission, and like just allowing them to know that I'm like aware of them, and that like you never know where those roads and circles may lead.
I think something Brees had put in the chat about how it felt like a big drawing to them from the first to the last images, and I like totally feel that, Brees. When I first saw the show completely installed, I'd seen images of the individual works, there is a real sense of like vastly different materials and approaches, but it feels really uniform, or not uniform. It feels really like, yes, like this A to Z, I get it, you know? And I think that's a testament also to just, you know, the quality of Nicole's work as a curator, for sure.
Yeah, I would just, following on that and Bree's comment, it was nice to read that comment because I was just thinking about your opening remarks about that pile of materials that you came back and discovered them stacked and shaped and formed and packed and fitted together, and how it was this moment, and then seeing the whole show, going back to your remarks and the kind of the coherence, of that throughout, is just also, yeah, like everybody has said, very satisfying to see, even and in its variety. Like that first one was just, very kind of contained and streamlined and architectural in a way and clean, and then the other ones, something like we're not, and all just a really wide variety of aesthetics, but also very cohesive. And on another note, I'm just curious if you could tell us how, from conception to execution and opening reception, how long was your curatorial process to put it all together?
Oh, it was months, but it definitely could have been longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, I only had a few weeks to actually put the theme out there. So that part was a little bit close, and then about a month of open submissions, and then maybe another 2 to 3 weeks in the selection process. It actually felt pretty compressed,
Sounds it. Yeah.
coming down to it. And I tried to, deal with layout in a very organized way, that I was like, oh, I'm gonna know what I'm doing and this will be no problem. And I, did like, a lot of floor plans and did a little bit of SketchUp and then that was really the moment. I mean, it's so, it's like, right. So you've got like over 300, you try to break that down. You try to make, sort of compartmentalize things and try to make a set of parameters. And I actually did, and I think I failed in this a little bit, but I tried not to include anybody, like in the embarrassment of riches. I tried not to include anybody that I knew had been in the show in the last few I had seen. There's a couple of people who it's like, you go to this, you're going to walk away with a handful of artists whose work maybe most spoke to you, and you might miss a couple of people who, it's just every year when you see the annual. But yeah, I tried to just, give new opportunities to people that hadn't been seen before. I tried to be open geographically, to just different areas, different types of people that might not have been included in the show before. But the actual install, which took place over many other days, but Carlin will know because we were really in there together. We spent like a full solid 8 hours of just like problem solving, figuring it out. Like there were certain relationships that I knew were going to happen. I didn't know the video was going to be where it is, and that kind of flipped everything on its head. So that, I think that was like really the most challenging day. Well, I don't know, that there were a lot of challenges, but like the selection and then getting everything in the room, to make it work and to make it make sense and be as beautiful as it is, like was a a few people together, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without Carla and Bob, because we were, yeah, really, it felt like the real like muscle of the art world. It's great though.
Great,
Oh,
very
worked out.
interesting. Such a complex process, really,
Yeah, it really was.
until it just sort of like, poof, looks easy. And it's not at all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no. And Laurie Fredette is asking this great question. Now that you realize the show, do you want to read it? Okay. Now that you realize the show, and if you were offered the opportunity, would you rehang any of the pieces for more intimate conversation? I'm really happy with how it turned out. There's also just the learning of the room. Like, I thought that it was going to be a little more simple because I have mostly worked in the same room at Art My for 8 years, and I was excited to take on a new space. But it's like, then there's just a whole new set of challenges to that. And in the selection process, well, there's also like this, it's like you're selecting artists and you're selecting works, right? So then there's all these layers to that. And I wanted to play with scale a lot, and I really wanted to have really big works, and I really wanted to have a bunch of sculpture, which like creates all kinds of problems, because it's like you've got the sculpture, and then the sculpture needs all the room around the sculpture, and it maybe needs like some wall space behind the sculpture, but then you have all these little things. And then I really thought that kind of small offshoot room where the video is, I kind of imagined a more salon kind of hang of a bunch of the smaller works, and then I had to just completely scrap that and refigure the whole thing out, because Bob had installed the video that is by an artist, Miguel Bricelli, and the video was hung, sorry, my dog is going to shoot, video in there, and I just loved the video in there. So then at that point I was like, okay, we have to rethink everything, because that's space. But I mean, I think that's like part of the game, and it's like the same thing as making an artwork, right? You like put like a brush stroke in, and you're like, oh, I really like how that looks, and then you have to redo everything to keep that one part that you realized is what the thing is about in the end. So felt like that a bit.
Nicole, can I ask a question about, I'm not really sure what the question is that I'm asking, but it's kind of related to art de pauvre and this idea of using humble materials or poor materials as like a political statement. And I'm curious if you find like a through line between these Italian artists, from, oh gosh, I'm gonna get my times off, 40s.
Okay. Just visit, we can all visit
Yeah.
Magazino and know what you're talking about.
Bad art historian, bad. Through to what these artists are working, the way that they're using materials, these either found or constructed materials, and I don't know, because I think there is like a real political, like, I think like Courtney was talking about, like being really conscious about not wasting materials. I don't know, do you have any reflections on that or thoughts? This is something I've been thinking about, and I've not like a fully formed thought, but
Yeah, I mean, I guess my kind of thought on that is like that I'm personally just like bogged down by like material consumption, kind of a little bit of what I said in the beginning. And it feels to me like there's a lot of people in this show who also feel like that, that are, just kind of appalled by consumption and are trying to reconcile a bit of that through their art practice. And yeah, it did feel a bit like, we're standing in the room together, all of like, us folks who like can't throw out a peanut butter jar or whatever, like that there's just like this moment that we're having. And I talk about this like a lot at Art Oh My. We have this piece by Atelier Van Lieshouse that's like really about the post-apocalyptic future. And I sort of felt like when we first installed like that was almost like a silly thing to talk about. Like, oh yeah, and now I feel like everybody's just like, yep. You know, like it doesn't feel like an outlandish thing to be like, oh, we are just gonna drown in all of this waste, you know, before we know it. You know, and also just to mention like that the same week that this show opened, we opened a show at Art Oh My with Portia Munson that really also directly dealt with these ideas of consumption and of the lure of plastics. And like what I think that, you know, it's like one of those wherever you go, there you are kind of moments, because it's like both shows open the same week and so many of the themes felt really consistent. But like one of the things that Portia, we have this one work in the gallery called Reflecting Pool, and it's just like a pool, like an outdoor pool that you put in your backyard that is just filled with plastic. And it's, you know, kind of repulsive on the one hand, it's just a big pile of junk. But on the other hand, like we still can't help but be attracted to those things. Like people come in and they're just like, oh yeah, I used to have that. Or like, you know, they just kind of still love it. So I think that that's like what's also kind of beautiful is like, you know, that even though it's like these things are still beautiful in their own way, like even the total junk, they're still an inherent beauty to everything. And then kind of being able to just like look at that like discarded milk jug and either just pull what's beautiful out of it or put everything of you into it, that makes that transformational moment.
Awesome. So Kylie had a great comment in the chat about consumption being an important thread. I see we're bumping right up at 3. If anybody else has a question, please feel free to ask, but otherwise, please join me in thanking and celebrating Nicole, Courtney, Melissa, Catherine, all of the other artists in the exhibition. It's an incredible show. You've got through November 6th to see it.
Oh, good, another dog. I just wanted to just throw in a quick plug, if Zach will let me, that the Portia Munson show closes this weekend. And we're having a big event for the show tomorrow from 2 to 5 that at the moment on the final Friday of installation for Portia's show is when the Roe v. Wade decision came in, and it felt, I don't know, horrible, but comforting to be in a room of like-minded women who I knew that we were going to fight like hell in this moment. And so this event will also be a fundraiser for the Abortion Within Reach Coalition. So please come out tomorrow from 2 to 5.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Congratulations, Nicole, on an excellent show and incredible presentation. Really, really thoughtful. Well put on all fronts.
Thank you. And hi, Millicent, who's also in the show. And hi, Catherine.
Thank you so much. That was really great.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey.
Thank you.